Why were you too scared to speak out about policies you disagreed with at university?
Okay, I'll do something annoying and sort of pick a hole in the question, which is the word scared. I think that, don't get me wrong, it's a very real thing to feel fear about the ramifications you can incur by saying, call it the wrong thing, or maybe better, the unpopular thing at the wrong time. And for me, it was the case of the latter. It was the wrong time because I recognised that, I didn't do a gap year. I was at university, sort of the youngest you could be. I went at 18, and my rationale was sort of, if I say things now that jeopardise my future at this institution, therefore my degree itself as a qualification, and also, which is equally as important, I do actually think when you're a young person and you're, socially fairly extroverted and that's a big part of your life, the social ostracisation was another risk. So I basically thought, as I say, my rationale was, I'm not any use to anyone, let alone myself, if I've said some things that already exist within public discourse and I don't have a degree either. Like, it didn't really feel like a useful or beneficial risk to take. Now, that was the case for the first couple of years of my degree. But then when I came back for my final year, my patience was wearing thin and I started saying a lot more things within my social circles, also in seminars.
Like what?
Just, I suppose, backing people's right to say what they want and, the whole sort of slippery slope argument. If you censor one thing, firstly, who decides what? And secondly, where do you draw the line? And yeah, I remember a girl opposite me looking at me as if I'd said something absolutely awful, as if I'd physically harmed her. And at the time I sort of laughed, but I remember leaving and her sort of muttering to another girl as if what I'd said, well, exactly what I mean. It's the whole kind of idea that just words are sort of akin to physical violence and aggression. Luckily, that was, as I say, very near the end of my degree, so I didn't have to kind of field much more disdain from her specifically. But honestly, I would have been happy to. I think it's good that we both left feeling a bit sort of ruffled and uncomfortable. Ironically, I think I was more comfortable with that discomfort than she was, but I think that's what university is about. And I think the fact that that's not really happening, as far as I'm concerned, and yeah, per the opinion of a lot of my peers, I think students are being really shortchanged, actually.
Do you think it's the case that these universities are worried about people, whatever political orientation, being offended by having provocative discussions? Or is it that they want to protect a certain narrative?
I think both of those things can be true at once, actually. So I think universities, first of all, it's interesting to think about, the average academic. What does that person look like? What have they done in their life? What jobs have they had? What roles have they played? What life experience have they had? Now, obviously, an academic, by definition, is an educated intellectual person who's able to impart that knowledge onto other people, specifically the young and the sort of moldable, mentally speaking. But they're also not necessarily people that are going to be very open to shifting their views because a young person said something to them. That really challenges, obviously, the natural hierarchy that, in my view, should exist in a seminar room, a lecture hall, whatever the case may be. Obviously, they are there as the more educated person to impart knowledge onto me. However, in my experience, the best academics are those that, they don't reduce their own status relative to you, but they are open to hearing what students have to say and championing it crucially when they disagree with it. I think it's really important that an academic is able to say, actually, no, let that person make their point, and then you can come back to it. And they can become, of course, they'll say something, paint a picture, give context for, let's say, a political situation, maybe a historical event, and then they become something of, hopefully, almost like a mediator between students that have things to say about that and hopefully will disagree with one another. But yeah, on the sort of narrative idea, so yeah, I think some academics, they maybe missed the boat. However, I'm loath to outwardly blame academics because, let's not lie, working as one is often a very, very unstable job. And, people have livelihoods, people have families. Of course, I can't expect somebody to risk it all just so that somebody can say something, maybe even for shock factor. I mean, especially in my experience, I studied Russian, and sometimes, I've been in plenty of seminars with other students who study other things, because sometimes you mix, and sometimes, especially young men, they might say things for shock factor. That's fine. I don't expect an academic to be like, great point, let's continue on that. But they should be allowed to say things in the first place. And then regarding offence, well, it's a word that's thrown around a lot, isn't it? And it's almost this kind of, people play it as like a trump card, which I think is really ironic. It's like, you've offended me, so you can't say that. Now, offence, yeah, that's one thing. But I think we've gone even further backwards, because now it's not even offence, it's just discomfort. You hear the word uncomfortable a lot.
Flesh out the difference.
Well, I would say if somebody's offended by something, it's because it directly targets them, and they think, oh gosh, I really disagree with this because you've attacked something that's maybe means a lot to me or is a key part of my identity, to use an overused word. But I think uncomfortable is if I say something that's nothing to do, like that girl, it's nothing to do with her. I literally said something about Soviet Russia. Nothing to do with her. She wasn't alive. Neither was I. She's also British.
She was offended on part of the Soviet.
Well, maybe, but this is what I mean. So she was uncomfortable as opposed to offended, I think. I mean, you can get into the linguistic nuances. It's not especially necessary. But you see what I mean? Like, you don't even have to attack something specific to that person. It's just something that's a bit like, oh, okay, now that there's tension in this room. That's not allowed. Do you know what I mean?
It feels like they're emoting rather than actually expressing any real grounded concern.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think a big problem is that, and especially if you sort of approach free speech from a fairly absolutist point of view, what that sometimes necessitates is something that for many people functionally is quite impossible, which is you have to sort of become impartial and sort of emotionless about something that often really, really pertains to you. Now, obviously, meant to get it in early. I think the gender debate is a prime example of this, and I've said it before. I really understand why it's become such a singular debate and why people get so up in arms about it, because it is so about the individual. And this, again, that keyword identity, it's really about the specificities of who you are, your journey, often the sort of trials and tribulations you've suffered in trying to work yourself out, whatever that might mean, regardless of whether your conclusions are, biologically impossible or not. I think it's interesting that, that debate really exemplifies the fact that we're often, and I'm guilty of this myself, you're naively optimistic because you're like, just debate it sort of objectively. Of course, that's not possible for so many people. And there are many debates. It's obviously dangerous to draw parallels between political issues. But you see what I mean? There are other things in the current political discourse where you can't expect somebody who might be a brilliant mind and debater and sort of orator on a topic to be able to debate it from a distance, because they are within it themselves by the nature of who they are, their background, ethnicity, religion, race, gender identity, whatever that may mean, etc., etc.
Well, that's something that travel's really given me. It's given me this realization that we all come to a conversation with our presuppositions.
Absolutely.
Always. Even if we're the most objective mind, where have we grown up? We've grown up in the West. We have certain Western ideals.
Yeah, you're male, I'm female. Like, there are going to be things that we'll disagree on simply because of that. I'm a couple of years your senior. There'll be things that we disagree on because of that. Like, I don't know. I think, you're exactly. I think travel is definitely a really big eye opener, cliche as it may sound, for understanding that that your life context, everything you've done up until the very second that you sit down, up until the very moment that you introduce yourself to somebody, even something as sort of seemingly trite as whether you have had a good morning that day or if you've had an argument with your partner or something, that will impact the way that you're going to discuss something with somebody, even if it's something as simple as, the weather. Potentially. So when it's something as potentially as fraught as one of the biggest political debates of our time, I think sometimes people do expect there to be this sort of lack of bias. But there's an understanding that's existed for basically forever about humans that there's basically no such thing as an unbiased person. Like, how could there be? If you've lived life, you've developed biases, presuppositions.
And what do you do with that bias? You realise that you should probably debate issues and work out what your biases are in pursuit of the truth. Now, one thing that's interesting to me is that we've got this censorship from professors too scared to speak about certain subjects, but it doesn't necessarily follow that would impact the culture outside of lecture halls. You might have the case of a secondary school like the one I went to, where you're taught not to swear or say certain words, but you're going to go out in the playground and say them immediately after your lesson. What are you seeing in terms of the students' perspective on this? Is this spilling over into uni culture and campus life outside of lecture halls, or is it just confined to those spaces?
It's no, the former uni life and campuses and the sort of SU and the bars and everything, that's where it starts. I also think that, I mean, you sort of draw a distinction between the professors being, as you put it, being scared to talk about this stuff or not even talk about it, posit it to students. First of all, I would like to reiterate, I recognise that quite simply is almost like above their pay grade. I recognise that it's a massive hassle for them to potentially incur. It is for them. This is kind of the point I'm trying to make. For them to potentially incur the the anger of a lot of these students, because it starts in the student body a lot of the time. Don't get me wrong, it can be massively perpetuated by, actually this is a key distinction to make, not necessarily academics themselves, but university staff. So your sort of well-being people, your student officers, like these people that the sort of bureaucratic body of a university, they're writing the emails, they're putting up the rainbow banners. Like, those are the academics are actually, they're not blameless, of course they're not, but at the same time, like I said earlier, I'd be loath to totally point the finger at them. I recognise that they've got a hard job in attempting the impossible, which is mediating between students who are potentially really captured by certain ideologies or points of view, whatever the case may be, and those students who aren't. So yeah, I don't entirely blame academics. I think that some could do more, but it would have to be an en masse movement. That's obviously very hard to coordinate. Different unis have different policies. They'd risk their job, yada, yada, yada. But then, so the staff, other staff at universities, so uni authorities and stuff, maybe they are, that I would lay the blame more at their door. But then, like I was saying, students themselves begin this. And they create, obviously we're the majority at university, the student population's, obviously it's the biggest one. And so, we know that it is students that kind of begin spreading ideas and points of view, and then it's not suddenly it's not spreading, suddenly it's enforcing, and then suddenly it's going one step further and punishing those who don't sort of imbibe this stuff readily. But obviously that involves you being open, ready to sort of openly say that you haven't. I know that a lot of people, and I think a lot of students who I know at other universities, we know that there are other people who will sort of quietly come up to you at a party and be like, oh yeah, I actually think that that's true, or I do disagree with this, or it is all a bit mad, or whatever. But the problem is, holding an unpopular view is one thing, but holding it publicly is entirely another. And to do that within a student population at a university, especially certain universities, it can be very hard. So I think that in this context, that the adults, the professors and the staff, they're downstream of what I do think originates among the students themselves.
Whose responsibility is it to get us out of this hole? Do you think that it's on the students to hold their opinions publicly always, or is it fine that they are suppressing their true thoughts?
Well, something that really struck me is that as soon as I began sort of saying more controversial things, which, by the way, as I stressed before, was very much towards the end of my time at university. So as I explained to you, my graduation ceremony is literally in about a week. I got my results a couple of weeks ago now, but, I'm fresh out of university. But what I would say is that, when I started sort of saying things more publicly and basically thinking, oh, screw it, I'll just kind of get on with this now. There's nothing they can do. I've made my friends. I'm leaving. I think I was always very aware of the fact that doesn't mean that I'm still not absolutely open to discuss stuff and actually change my views on things if I'm presented with evidence or evidence to the contrary of what I believe currently. I think what bothers me the most isn't that students think certain things, because at the end of the day, I can't stop that and I don't want to. My issue is that they won't discuss them and they won't discuss the other side at all. So I've asked so many students, young people generally, to, not in an accusatory way at all, genuinely in a curious way, to substantiate certain things they believe, be it the old adage, I don't know, trans women are women, or if I say, oh, do you know what the river to the sea means, or something like that, of which I only say those two things because those are things that you see students or young people kind of holding on placards. And I sort of ask, what does that mean to you? Why do you feel that way? Let's talk about that. In no way am I coming across as interrogative or angry or kind of, I'm not trying to do some kind of gotcha debate tactic. And people are like, what? Oh, they'll sort of stumble potentially, and then they'll just leave the conversation before it begins and before it even has the chance to become a debate. So yeah, my problem at universities isn't that people hold opinions I disagree with. My problem is that those opinions are never discussed.
What do you think it is about university that makes these people so hesitant to be challenged? Is it the age of people attending university? Is it this kind of collective sum of people all agreeing with each other and then rebelling against others? What is it that's going on there?
Yeah, you're right. At university, as I mentioned, there are obviously it's a lot of 18 to 20 somethings. Primarily, of course, many people go older, but that's obviously the majority all in one place. The funny thing about university is it's obviously you go there at that age and stage of your life and I guess sort of stage of your development cerebrally precisely because somebody can rummage around and mold your mind, but you have to be open to that. I think the issue is that potentially used to be the case to a greater extent. Obviously, I wasn't there, but it's now obviously true. More people go to university than ever. There are obviously many, many universities in this country. People are studying a whole range of things, are coming from a whole range of backgrounds. And I just think the collective openness to discussion and debate has really, really, really been shut down. Now, precisely the opposite is true. I think, I've made this point before, and it's something that really struck me and made me quite sad, I think, while I was at university, which is, however naively, I thought, university, surely that would be the place in, a society like here in the UK where you can absolutely challenge the unchallengeable, say whatever you want, not with impunity, but you can say it. And if you back it and, have a discussion about it, that's fine. But the inverse has happened, where now universities, as we know, it's kind of the worst kept secret in Britain now, isn't it? They're some of the places where people are the most censored. And no, I agree with you. I think it's really strange that young people seem to be almost embracing that. They're almost happy to have this kind of intellectual inertia where they're kind of like, okay, right, well, I'll just say what I'm supposed to say and go along with it. Or even worse, totally disengage. So you've got people who are very militant's a bit of an overused word, but who, let's say, are really quite resolutely on the left and believe things that they think are very tied up with morality. And so they're like, hey, this is the right side of history and I'm right and this is what I think and this is very important. And then you've got some people who will publicly go against that. In my view, you've got many people who go against it but not publicly. But then there's this whole grey area now of young people, and this is kind of what I meant by being shortchanged. They feel pushed out of a conversation because that conversation doesn't really exist. So you go to, I don't know, a pub or a party and you say anything or something is alluded to, or you see some kind of poster and people are like, oh, let's just not get political, because people are tired of it. They know the conversation will be polarised. Neither side will really want to listen to each other. And yeah, it will end before it's begun. So it's that middle ground of students which I worry the most about. That's not to sound condescending or anything, but I guess in a way, yeah, I really pity that demographic, because it's not to say that they're not intellectually engaged enough to have discussions. It's that the discussion isn't being facilitated and it's actively being discouraged by their fellow students in many ways.
What I can draw from that is it feels like there are too many people going to university. And that's probably a taboo thing to say nowadays. But to me, it obviously follows from that there are these people that aren't interested in having their malleable mind actually changed. They just want to get a certificate because Tony Blair set an arbitrary target for more than half of under 30-year-olds, whatever it is, to go to university.
Get a higher education qualification, exactly.
And now it's happened. So we've got all of these people that aren't interested in what university was initially for, shouting down the people that do have their minds open and telling them, no, this is how you have to think, and moulding their minds into a place of being unwilling to then change them.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I agree with you that it has been sort of coming out of the woodwork that people are now more openly actually saying, hold on, maybe there are too many students. I mean, there's a part of me, I guess because I recently am one, I'm about to continue being one as a master's student. I recognise, it was quite a sort of wishy-washy point of view, but what a sad thing to think there can be too many students in a society. I think it's a lovely thing to be a student. And then it's also, I think, that it's a good thing objectively to want to have your mind shaped, provided that you go to an institution that you truly believe will do that, and you're not and that you try hard while you're there and all of these things, and that you study something that is worth studying, because there are some degrees that maybe, in fact, I believe it. I think there is a hierarchy. There are some degrees that I do think are just worth less, and that's fine. But yeah, no, the argument about whether or not there are too many people attending university is an important one. I don't really have a point of view on it as yet, but I do think, that most likely is a factor of what is happening now regarding the political kind of stagnation of political discussion at universities. Yeah, I agree with you. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. Would just, admitting fewer people? I think that's an option, but what you'd have to do is provide alternatives. Now, degree apprenticeships in this country are getting better and better, and I really enjoyed university. It suited me very well. It's a big part of why I'm sort of staying within it. But for another year. But at the same time, precisely because it suited me so well, I absolutely see why it wouldn't suit others well at all, to the extent that I think it really wouldn't get the best out of them. And I think whatever you do at the age of 18, 19, 20, whatever you do, it should be something that at worst you can sort of be proud of, and at best you can be proud of and really kind of benefits you and leads to hopefully some success in an area that you enjoy and can hopefully be fruitful. So yeah, if you were to kind of cut university admissions, which by the way I don't think will happen for obviously financial reasons, so that's a bit of a pipe dream if that's what you wanted to happen, but you'd have to provide alternatives, and I think the promotion of degree apprenticeships should be better in schools, including in private schools, because it matters. I think, yeah, university simply isn't for everyone, but we're sort of pretending like it is. There's this romantic idea that like, oh, anyone can be a student. Yeah, sure they can, but you're actually forgetting what might be best for an individual, and you're sort of removing their true autonomy because they think, oh God, if I'm intellectually engaged, I have to go to university, and choice is taken off the table. There are many, many, many things that you can do at the age of 18, 19, and it's not go to university or go to Thailand and find yourself. There are some amazing paths you can take. I mean, I sit across from you and you decided not to go to university, and as far as I understand, that was a very consciously taken decision. I think more people should be equipped by their schools, ideally by their parents, obviously that's a different thing. Yeah, I think by their schools primarily to be able to make that choice to not go.
I think something wrapped up in all of this is the idea that university, and specifically being a student, is superior to not being one. There's this entitlement that spills over into all of these beliefs and thinking, of course I'm right because I'm a student. You're a dumb plumber doing a degree apprenticeship.
Yeah.
When that's just so far from the truth. It's ridiculous. And that then feeds into all of these champagne socialists who are proclaiming to know the truths of the universe and what we should do, when actually their whole life they've been sheltered from the real world. They're studying, they think they're getting a grip on what's actually going down, but they've got professors that are censoring the truth from them. It's a Molotov cocktail for destruction.
Professors, again, I would just hesitate to directly blame professors. Let's say sort of more university authorities as a whole. It's genuinely, I've had some amazing professors and I would never want to sort of disparage them by any means. I recognise that some are, you've got some professors who genuinely really are letting students down and failing them and feeding them, honestly, like lies. But personally, and I know that a lot of my peers, we had brilliant experience with our professors. So yeah, universities sort of as a culture, and authorities, staff more generally within universities, yeah, they're shortchanging their students, as I said before. I think what I was going to say about that is that, yeah, you're right. University, it can feel like a bubble. Something that's really important is you're not earning. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've sort of done work on the side, like be it music or kind of basically cash in hand bar work and stuff like that. And I think that's a great thing for students to do, basically for sort of beer money. But at the end of the day, you're not financially responsible to yourself in a kind of really obvious way. And sure, you have your loans and eventually you do have to pay those off. But, it's the classic student experience. It's like, oh, well, that's a problem for future me, And although it is a real problem, student loans, obviously, they're very, very unforgiving. But yeah, what I was going to say is you're right, university can be something of a bubble. And I do disagree with the superiority complex as kind of peddles to students. I think it's sometimes done quite consciously because universities, they're businesses and they're trying to advertise, and it's the whole kind of cap and gown. And and especially there's something that's very key about the universities of the United Kingdom is a lot of them, they're old, they're established, they're beautiful. Yeah. It's your sort of sandstone buildings, it's your clock towers, especially, universities like Durham, Bristol, obviously Oxbridge. There are lots of universities that are, you walk in and it's this kind of the hallowed halls and all the people that went before, big libraries. Like you can romanticize it, for want of a better word. And I recognize that can really take people in. I'm fine with that, but there have to be other reasons as well. I'm not trying to say that some students are just there sort of for the gram, but at the same time, I think some unis are leaning into that, and it's wrong. Yeah, obviously, choice of degree is a really important one. And that can be complex. I mean, every single year it comes out like what's the least employable degree. It's very often something like English literature. Yeah. And then the most employable increasingly is stuff to do with computer science, engineering, obviously. Medicine is kind of a different gravy because by its nature. But yeah, we know that obviously humanities and arts degrees, they don't necessarily stand you in very good stead from an employment perspective. But university obviously takes up so much of your time. So you can't necessarily kind of do uni and do an apprenticeship that is very good for the CV simultaneously. You've got a long summer break when you go to university, but a lot of students, I won't lie, a degree, even if you procrastinate a lot, it's still hard work. So a lot of students are like, no, I'm going to a festival. And then they don't necessarily kind of use their summer in the most professional or sort of entrepreneurial way. And at the end of the day, if you're 19, like, you can't be blamed for that. So yeah, choice of degree matters. Reason for going matters. I wish that more students were able to self-interrogate and crucially be interrogated by their schools, their sixth forms, about why they want to go in the first place. Because I think for some students, the financial implication of going to university is enough to mean that they're very, they've got to be very certain. But for other students, that's simply not the case. Not because they're sort of financially illiterate, but because student loans are a thing. So it doesn't really feel like you're, spending loads and loads of money at the time, even though you are. Yeah. For the vast majority of 18-year-olds, it's easily the biggest financial commitment you've made in your life thus far, easily. If you've bought a car for a couple of grand when you're 17, that's a thing entirely apart from leaving with over 20 grand of debt.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole issue as well of middle-class people being able to be funded by mummy and daddy and just focus on their degree, whereas working-class people, they want to go to university, and let's say it is the right decision, they end up working full-time as well to fund their accommodation and whatever other costs they have, so they get distracted from the degree itself. But I want to speak about your experience now in Bristol.
Sure.
You've been doing a lot of trans activism, as in anti-trans activism, so to speak. What's that been like? What kind of... I saw that you went to a museum on your Twitter where they had a certain exhibition. Talk to me about that.
I did do that. I've done a few things. As I say, the timeline is quite sort of obvious. I've had an X account, Twitter account, whatever you want to call it, since I think about 2016. I'd literally never posted anything. I didn't even have the app downloaded until I started university. And then I used it as a kind of very unreliable but interesting news source kind of thing. And also it's interesting to see what individuals think of certain situations. Obviously people tweet with reckless abandon, so that's that can be quite, you can really get a sense of what somebody's annoyed about at the time, or what somebody thinks deserves, reverence, or whatever the case may be. But anyway, so I started posting just not long before I sat my final exams at the start of May. And then, since then I've done some other stuff in the real world, which in my view obviously is a bit more important. So with that, the Bristol Museum and Art Gallery is actually next to one of Bristol University's most sort of iconic university buildings. It's very much in sort of, it's near the centre of Bristol as a city. And they have an exhibition called Gender Stories, which, I went to, honestly, very open-mindedly. And it was, I don't want it to be taken away at all. I think God, I'd be such a hypocrite if I said, get rid of it. I don't think that's the case at all. I think it should be there.
Well, let's lay a bit of groundwork for people. So this is from their website. The Gender Stories exhibition and the mural in the entrance hall included imagery that may be triggering for some viewers. This includes abstracted references to gender transition surgery. The imagery is intended to create an inclusive, welcoming space, but please check with us if you have any questions or concerns. This exhibition contains some themes of gender-based violence, abortion, nudity, discrimination, and sexual content. Recommended visitor age 14 plus. What went down at the exhibition? What were you seeing?
So there's two things going on at once at the moment at Bristol Museum and Art Gallery. So in the entrance hall, which is sort of a big, like a sort of atrium thing with a balcony running around. It's a beautiful building. And currently in the entrance hall, there are a series of frescoes that the main ones are about 8 feet high, I would say. Maybe a bit taller, actually, maybe about 10. And it's an artist who is a trans-identified female, so it's a woman who's born female and now identifies as male, who operates under the artist name Mr. Samo. And this artist, painted a sort of... It's not cartoony, like the art style is a style, and it depicts a figure who's sort of androgynous looking with scars, the scars that you get if you undergo a double mastectomy. And these scars, they're painted sort of like on like a cartoon of a pirate, a line with the stitches through it, at the sort of chest level. And then next to it in letters 2-3 feet high, it says, "You are loved." And so that element of what's currently on display in Bristol Museum and Art Gallery, if you want to go in, even if you stand in the very, very, very entrance lobby just to get a ticket, you can see it, and they're in very bright colours. So you cannot enter the museum to look at the kind of dinosaur exhibit or the they have some really nice like history-related collections of artifacts, etc. You can't go in without walking past these things that, as I say, are incredibly eye-catching and have the phrase "you are loved" next to an image of somebody who has undergone surgery, because they're operating under the understanding that their body is wrong. So I looked at that, and I was genuinely just quite confused. I was unsurprised, don't get me wrong. I've been around the houses within this debate, such as it is, but what a contradiction, Anyway, so you walk past that, and then you go further into the museum, and then you go into this actual exhibition, Gender Stories. And there it has artworks, paintings, of all different mediums, painting, sculpture, drawings, I believe. And then it's got lots of sort of artifacts, like pieces of clothing, banners, badges, lots of stuff that is related to the so-called LGBTQIA+ community. I mean, it's not a very communal population, maybe is a better word. And then, and the sort of things underneath the little, curator's notes underneath all of these works are firstly incredibly self-congratulating.
Yes.
And they tiptoe around, issues and controversies and whatever. And they basically, some of them, don't get me wrong, are works that depict maybe two women, and it's the sort of far older artworks. There's a lot of photography also, I forgot to mention. So some of them it's more sort of tame, but then there are so many elements of that exhibition that are just so uncompromising. And the whole point of being a curator is that you present another artist's work and you present it with just the right amount of context to make sure that a viewer, consumer, if you will, is able to form his or her own opinions without being swayed by what some random curator, faceless curator might think. And that's obviously, there's been a huge failing there, because that's obviously not the case. And then, you move further through. At one point, there's this huge trans flag on the wall, and it has a whole kind of paragraph being like, they've suffered so much abuse, discrimination, And there's just so much, in that regard. And I did quite a detailed sort of like unpacking of it on Twitter and took a lot of photos of it, because I was quite struck by a lot of these things. Again, I really stress, I do not want them to get rid of that exhibition. If anything, I think it's really important it exists. It's quite incriminating. So I'm fine that it's there. The stuff in the entryway, I think, is wrong, because I think I've got a picture of, there was a group of school children, they must have been aged about 8 or 9, and obviously I didn't get their faces in it or anything, but there were 3 girls, probably about 8, just looking up at it. And I remember thinking, like, you might not even know how that could impact you, but I don't think that young, especially female children, should have to try and sort of understand what's being posited there. And then the contradiction that I think is so blatant, I think is really, really damaging. Yeah.
I think the trans debate, it's been done so many times. A lot of people flog a dead horse for the sake of views online.
Definitely.
But something that I haven't seen that much is people our age speaking about this unless they have the opposite viewpoint to you.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting, without getting bogged down in the weeds too much, to hear what your issues actually are with this exhibition.
Sure. So first of all, you say, I totally agree with you. It's quite rare you see young people openly challenging it, let alone, condemning it. Especially, I think it's important to make the point that it's very rare to see young women doing that. That's not to say that I'm not some kind of vigilante, but I do think it's important that we as a demographic are represented. And I say that solely because I know that there are many young women that agree with me, because they've either told me so in real life on so many occasions, or I'm constantly receiving, I get dozens and dozens of messages every day, and I don't even have a massive online presence because I just haven't really done that at this point. But the amount of messages, which is girls and young women, sometimes as young as sort of 14, 15, being like, I totally agree with you, I'm really scared to say anything. My friends would hate me, whoever would break up with me, like all of this stuff. I understand that representation of it is important. And there are obviously other young women doing the same, and luckily I'm friends with many of them, and it's great. My reasoning behind wanting to challenge the ideology, now first of all, the word transphobic is obviously one that is attributed to me and others very, very frequently. First of all, I mean, I studied languages at uni, so I'm pretty keen to make sure that it isn't misused and deliteralized. A phobia is an irrational fear of something that is disproportionate to the risk it actually poses to you. Now, if I see a trans person, I'm not scared at all, necessarily. Certain contexts, obviously, I may be. It's not that I'm afraid of somebody who describes themselves as trans. It's not that I wish any harm on anybody. And I think that's insane. It's more, if I'm afraid of anything, it's the ideology itself and how pernicious it is, and the fact that it quite clearly targets, in many cases, the vulnerable and often the young, especially young girls.
How so?
Because it is all about basically leaning in to the fact that your mental state and your perception of your body is misaligned with your actual corporeal or physical form, and that needs to be rectified, not from the mental side of things, but from the physical side. So the idea is that you should, I mean, in the first instance, have begin taking puberty blockers, which, I mean, it's obviously been debunked hundreds of times that those are reversible. They're obviously not. And then you have to, then the idea is you go on to hormones, estrogen or testosterone, as the case may be, which in many cases sterilize you. And then the idea is that you have surgery. And there are many, many euphemisms that are sort of applied to these surgeries. So top surgery, that literally means double mastectomy of healthy breasts. And then bottom surgery is basically it's total fallacy. You can't swap somebody's genitals, surgically speaking. It's not possible medically. If it is in the future, okay, but it obviously isn't. So it's extremely damaging. It incurs huge, and very, very bad side effects. It's pretty fatal for some people. But anyway, so the euphemisms abound in the trans debate because it's kind of trying to trivialize things that are hugely damaging to your physical body. But anyway, so that's my main issue with it, is that it targets an idea that it targets and promotes an idea that your body is wrong. And I think that's basically all of the horrible kind of, it's sort of body dysmorphia. It's not that far from sort of diet culture, eating disorder culture that's obviously been rife online and targeted again at young girls and women for years. It's saying, yeah, your body's wrong, so fix it drastically, aggressively, irreversibly. That's awful. It's also definitely something that's really tied into the lesbian, gay and bisexual population because it's often the case that, it's been proven time and time again, the statistics are very much out there. I won't quote them, so I'm not inaccurate, that a lot of the young people that are pushed in the direction of transition, that they will grow up to be gay or lesbian, as the case may be, and that's fine. I think it's really, really regressive that we're basically implying that because you present in a more, feminine way, whatever that might mean, as a male child, that means you are a girl. That's archaic. That's so archaic.
It's conversion therapy.
It's sure. What it is it's the opposite of progressive. So that's definitely something I think we'll agree on.
And I think this is something that's so important to push back on at our age, because I am sick of all these activists that potentially are flogging a dead horse because their career depends on it at a different age group. But there's still,
like who?
I think someone like Kelly J. Keane, what else is she going to do from here?
Well, she already is.
What's she doing?
Don't get me wrong, I recognise just a tiny point on Kelly J. Keane. I've met her multiple times. I think a lot of her work is brilliant. Whether you agree with her specifically or not, I think, especially as a woman, you'd be hard-pressed to deny that her setting up, if you're gender critical, her setting up Let Women Speak has been a brilliant thing to do. I think there's absolutely space for it. There's a sort of market for it. Wrong phrase, but you know what I mean. So she's definitely done a great thing there. I recognise that some women will dub her too extreme, too hardline. But at the end of the day, any movement, especially something that's pushing back, as you said, you do need someone that's sort of all the way over there, so to speak.
And what I am suspicious of is, where do her incentives lie now that she's established this career? And I think this spills over to people that see the success she's had from being hardline, and they think, I want that fame and attention. And this sounds very cynical, but I know for a fact that this happens. And there are certain people that I can't speak about on camera that I know do this for the sake of fame and attention. And if they... Grifters. And if they had a red button they could press that would stop the transitioning as kids, they wouldn't do it because it would come at the cost of their career. And this transcends the trans debate. It transcends the trans debate. It's in all kinds of domains. It's in the immigration debate.
Absolutely,
it's in everything. There are always going to be grifters.
Sure. That's, at the end of the day, you know what they say, politics is show business for ugly people. Like there are things and issues that, it's sort of sadly one of those slightly worse elements of human nature, where if something is happening, there's a real bandwagon and people will jump on it. There are people in my life who have, Whereas, specific people who've accused me of being, like a grifter and just kind of jumping on the trans thing, I defend myself in that regard by saying two things. Point one, my rights are directly under threat, and I've suffered certain things as a result of trans ideology absolutely permeating spaces where I live and operate. And point two, I've known it's probably, bar sort of certain more hobby pursuits, it's probably the political thing I've known the most about for the longest. I started waking up to it and understanding it and researching it so much, not in a sort of obsessive way, but because I was aware that I held instinctively the kind of unpopular view. So I looked into it loads, read literature from primarily actually the trans side of things, almost in part because I was like, gosh, I think the wrong thing. This is when I was 14. I read, then I started reading Abigail Schreier, obviously Helen Joyce, these women. Kind of is the kind of pipeline of journalists, very, very high-flying journalists to commentator on this issue amongst women is a good one, because I think you've got women who know what it is to fact check, to be reliable, to not just kind of find the story, but actually report the facts. Anyway, so I've been on top of this and understanding it for a very, very long time and developing my views on it for a very long time. And key point, challenging myself on it all the time. Because it matters to me, and also because, like I mentioned earlier, I truly think it's really, really singular. Nothing like this has happened before. Nothing that pertains so directly to the individual, but that has become so sort of cult-like in its promotion. And it's also interesting because, this is what feminism sort of looks like nowadays. I think second wave is obviously what a lot of women will point to as decent feminism, and then third wave, we totally lost our way. So I think for a lot of women, being gender critical, again, a phrase that I think is very ridiculous, but let's just use it, that's kind of, if you want to truly dub yourself as somebody that supports women's rights in the West at the moment, you should care about this issue. And I do care about women's rights, so I do care about this issue. I don't want to get bogged down in it. Also, if I don't want it to be the only political thing that I know about and can talk about, which is why actually my presence online is not huge and I'm not constantly self-promoting. Not that there's anything wrong with that, I suppose. But yeah, I don't want it to be the only thing that I'm understood to know about, because it absolutely isn't.
Well, there are a few things there. One of them is that I'm in no means calling someone like Kelly J. Keane a grifter.
No.
I'm saying that she has a genuine cause that she's fighting for, and there are risks that come with getting trapped in that. Now, the thing is as well, we need experts on things that devote their life to one issue.
Sure.
But we need to be careful with the things that play with social media, activists shouting down other people. We just need to be cognizant that there is benefit to shouting down people for the sake of winning an argument on a shallow level to get views and money online. And we need to try our hardest to root out those people, so that the people that are genuine activists who are pursuing the truth and who care about women's rights, women's safety, can flourish and can take the argument forward.
What I say for Kelly J. Keane is probably more so than any other, call them TERFs, call them what you will. Again, so much of the language has been pushed upon people. And yeah, again, as a language inclined person, I think it's really frustrating how you have to understand that a lot of these acronyms, they're misnomers. They're not accurate words, but I guess there's a certain reclamation takes place, and you can use them. A lot of women that I associate with who agree with me, they'll very proudly call themselves TERFs because, like I say, it's reclamation. That's fine. So amongst TERFs, I think Kelly J. Keane is absolutely, what you definitely cannot fault her for is being online. She's absolutely out there doing things, be it Let Women Speak, I actually will say she has slightly shifted her attention now. She's been doing a lot of, in my opinion, really valuable work regarding challenging the wearing of religious dress by women within Islam. So she recently did a sort of demonstration in Hyde Park. She uses the phrase "free your faces." And she's been publishing, to be fair, she does use her Twitter, but interestingly, she uses it very journalistically because she publishes the words of others. So she'll receive messages from women telling her about their story, how they began, having to cover themselves, their hair, whatever the case may be, when they were very, very young. And she puts their voices out there, obviously protecting their anonymity. So she makes forays into other things that are important. It's dangerous to pit political issues against one another. And so, yeah, I can't fault her. I think she's an activist, if that makes sense. She's out in the world doing things, and she does encourage other women to do similar. And she quite literally gives them a microphone and a voice. I've spoken at Let Women Speak multiple times in Bristol and more recently in Hyde Park, and it's a great thing. So you're right. Of course there are grifters. I mean, I can think of a few. And unfortunately, some young people are kind of like that.
I think they're more susceptible to it.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, they're young people, like, frontal lobes and all that. It's fine. But I think something that's important to recognise is that with X, with TikTok, with Insta, whatever the case may be, everything's so algorithmic now, including actually just out and out, like, honest journalism. Like, if you work as a journalist, it's even more cutthroat than it used to be, because your editor, the owner of a paper, can see how many clicks your article is getting. Just as if I put, I'm not on TikTok and I never have been, but if I posted an article, no, that's a lie, I was very briefly in lockdown, but it's a cesspit. If I posted something about, that was quite, like, shock factor, punchy, disparaging, something within the trans sort of debate, and that got loads and loads of engagement, and then I posted something maybe a bit more niche about, I don't know, some other political issue of our time, if the former got more engagement, I recognise why people are going to understand, okay, that's what people want to hear, I'll give them more of that. And then obviously there are personal benefits, be they financial, sort of clout, for want of a better word. I get why people do it. It's the price you pay if you're going to have, constant public access to information, the global forum of ideas, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, people are going to filter what they say based on how popular it's going to be, because everybody wants to sort of rise to the top in that sense and wants their voice to be loud. Yeah,
it's a trade-off to freedom. And that's why I'm so strong on condemning people who use that freedom irresponsibly. I think the key piece in this puzzle is responsibility. And that's quite a shit way of squaring the circle, rather than giving a hard answer of a law we need to impose to stop people from doing these things. But I value freedom a lot, and these are trade-offs that we have to consider. It's on the people to take responsibility in how they use these platforms.
It's true. I mean, especially when it comes to the young or the disempowered or the angry or the shunned, it's very hard to hope that people will take the moral high ground that often is kind of synonymous with being responsible, isn't it? Like, I'm not trying to sort of sound really, really cynical or pessimistic about humanity in its entirety, but it is hard to expect people to be responsible, especially online, because anonymity is a key ingredient to a lot of how people operate.
For sure.
And with that, forget responsibility, there's not even accountability. So that's just kind of an element to consider. It's with respect, I think it's pie in the sky. Like, you're not gonna be able to be like, oh, just be responsible. It's a bit too close to saying sort of be nice. Like, you're not necessarily. I think both of those are equally as unlikely as one another.
You can shift the culture in a certain direction, though.
Yeah, for sure.
We all have the agency to do that.
For sure. And to be fair, there are things that have happened online that I think are kind of woken people up in some ways. I think obviously it's pointed to a lot, but Elon Musk taking over Twitter, now X, that obviously made it a place where you could speak far more freely. And although there were huge teething problems, and still are, I think I do believe that it changed it for the better. And so I think there, funnily enough, because you were given more responsibility, I mean, people are sort of like children in that respect. You give them more, and then they sort of take it quite well after a period of time, and they're more able to sometimes be a bit more measured. And that there are other things. I think definitely education for young people about online culture needs to be better. But I think you might agree with me on this. The problem is that the young, not the very, very young, but the sort of teenagers, I think for a very long time, they'll be the best at using whatever's currently going on online. I think a teacher in a school over the age of 35, they're not going to be that well versed necessarily in the ins and outs of TikTok, just as in the same way as they're not going to understand sort of meme culture and humor, are they? So it's hard to educate the younger generation on something that is used predominantly by the younger generation. I mean, we've all seen a teacher struggling with PowerPoint. Like, it's that on, writ large, isn't it? When it comes to social media, how to educate those at whom it is marketed and who populate it in the majority. This is specifically, I think X obviously is not true. That's more adults, but TikTok definitely, Instagram, I'd say. So it's hard. But yeah, I think the responsibility, fine, maybe pie in the sky was a bit harsh. I think we could get there, but it would rely on better education regarding the online sort of sphere.
For sure. And I think it's a shift in our metrics of success, because at the moment, success is praised so much in the form of people looking up at successful influencers that get views and likes and comments. But that comes at the cost of not really judging them as harshly as maybe we should do. So I think part of this, a partial solution, is just shifting what we actually value as a society. Now, that's incredibly hard to do,
Well, it
when it's
takes
shoved down.
arguably takes generations, doesn't
This
it?
is what's so terrifying for me.
Yeah.
So when especially when it's shoved down our throats constantly by elite programmers that know that we're going to tend towards those metrics,
Sure.
plays on our monkey brains.
Yeah.
But if we can shift what we actually value as success, it means that we're going to be more condemning of people that are just chasing views and comments and say, look, great, you're getting loads of engagement, but you're a grifter and you have no valid point.
In fairness, I think that we do know, the monkey brain point is such a good point. I think we do know that a lot of the time, okay, you have to think about online, the things that do the best are the things that get the most engagement, which actually means they're kind of, this is not always the case because sometimes things go viral because they incite like massive support or massive outrage. So, and both of those parties want to look at it, right? But sometimes the things that often do best, like do you remember when the most viewed video on TikTok for ages was Bella, whatever her name is, just doing some ridiculous cross-eyed dance, like bobbing her head? We know that a lot of the stuff that engages the most people is precise. It has mass appeal precisely because it has no substance. So it's not going to offend or encourage or influence you to do anything. It's just something that's easy to watch. I mean, Gangnam Style went viral. Crazy Frog is still doing the rounds. Like this stuff. Yeah, you're right. It's the monkey brain stuff that is just kind of vaguely amusing and you can just consume at 3 a.m. That's easily consumable, just like junk food kind of media. That's often what really, really becomes popular online. That doesn't mean it's valuable. But I agree with you that that's kind of a slightly separate point. But I agree with you. I think if we recognise what we actually want to value, we're going to have to kind of reassess that collectively. And that will take a long time. The one thing I was going to say is influencer culture is interesting. I mean, we all collectively recognise it is so toxic and so shrouded in absolute bullshit, to put it frankly, and it's all filters and editing. To an extent, the tide is turning a bit. Like I've seen some interesting stuff online where influencers will kind of put 30 seconds of a video and then they'll suddenly like clap and then the filter's off and their whole body looks different. And they're like, see what I did there? See how easy it is? See how you were fooled? And it's not to say, haha, you're an idiot, I fooled you. It's to say, don't let yourself be as easily fooled. Don't take this stuff as a given. So there is some pushback, especially from female influencers, I will say, which is good. Because obviously so much of the time it's incredibly slim young women in bikinis and you obviously feel rubbish if you're 14 and uncomfortable in your body. And then guess what happens? But influencers, they're so deified, but even their job title, if you can call it, I mean, they make a lot of money, but is it a job? Who knows? Their status title, let's say, almost by definition, if you're an influencer, you can't really be a leader, because if your whole point is to influence people to do a certain thing that you might not even necessarily agree with, you're just a go-between, you're just a mouthpiece for a company, an organisation, a product. Like, to be truly really sort of charismatic and show real leadership is to do something unpopular potentially, go off in the opposite direction and not care who actually follows you. Whereas an influencer, I mean, quite literally, your followers are everything.
Right.
So yeah, the deification of influencers, obviously it's kind of a tired point. We all know that it's almost like narcotic in how bad it is. And you sort of love to hate them, or you hate that you love them. You don't know if you want to be with them or be them. It's all very complicated. We know that fundamentally it is bad, especially for the young brain, because comparisons are so easy to make and so hard to undo. I don't really know. I mean, in an ideal world, influencer culture wouldn't really exist. But again, as I say, influencers are experts in understanding what will have mass appeal. They're good at making that sort of wishy-washy, boring content. So yeah, they're there for the kind of average consumer. They're not necessarily trying to target specific people. It's why I do have more respect for influencers who, whether it's a sort of political stand, doesn't even need to be an influencer who's like, okay, I'm, a skateboarder and that's my thing. If you're into skateboarding, you can follow me. It's the influencers who just don't really do anything. That's what bothers me the most. They're the most pointless. They just suck the life out of things. Like, they do nothing except sort of drape themselves over furniture and, I don't know, like, drink whatever energy drink they're sponsoring that week. I don't think there's a problem with people online promoting hobbies and ways of life or skills that they have that are amazing. I mean, it's brilliant what you can see online that people are doing. It's quite sort of life affirming and it's cool. But it's the influencers who are just so vacuous. They're, for me, really quite problematic because they're just sort of these anonymous, like, smiling, Barbie-esque people that I think literally offer nothing to online culture.
Well, you have to ask, what is it that you're aspiring to have? What is it that you want when you look at these influencers? Is it a skill that they possess? They don't show you any skills. They're showing you their lifestyle. They're all lifestyle influencers. most of them. Like the typical influencer that rocks up to a baseball game and they've got front row seats, or a basketball game and they're drinking the energy drink
famous
from their
being
sponsor.
Famous kind of thing.
They've got charcoal toothpaste, that kind of thing. What is it that you want? Okay, so you don't want their skills because they're not demonstrating any. It's something like the lifestyle that they live and nothing else. What is it about that lifestyle that you like? Well, it's the hedonistic element, it's the flex, it's the status. Okay, cool. But like, what does that give you in life? And I think this is what I'm cognizant of not becoming, having a podcast, trying to just blow it up. Like, why are you watching my podcast? What substance am I giving you? And I think with me, I'm trying to actually engage with the world. I'm trying to engage with ideas and pursue the truth. But if you break it down to the fundamentals, influencers, the only skill they possess is that they're good marketers. So fine if you want to be a marketer, but like most of the people don't want to be a marketer. That's not what they're consciously impressed by.
And also, sorry to interrupt you, but that's a marketer. That's a dirty word. Like, people don't want to feel like they're being sold to, do they? They want to go online, and like, it's ironic that the word influencer, I've already sort of outlined my what I find quite funny about it, but also the fact that it's so obvious what they're trying to do is constantly try and sell you things, like everything they're wearing and eating, like the chair they're sitting on, the flights they're taking, the hotel they're staying in, like everything they're doing is so that you look at it and you think, I want that. And obviously you can't have all of it because money's exhaustible for most people and you're not going to get given stuff for free, yada yada. But it's this kind of idea that just by sort of existing and consuming certain things themselves, they'll push you to want to consume the same thing, because this is what I think people want out of it. They think, if I just had that, then my life would be sort of more similar, and so I'd be happy, I'd be fulfilled, I'd be satisfied. But but it's funny because influencers so wily, they're so good at selling things to people when you at no point feel like you're being, given an elevator pitch or advertised to directly. Like it's a whole new sort of lease of life for what advertising is, because all of us are sick of pop-up ads and annoying billboards and adverts. Every streaming platform now has, go on, if you have Amazon Prime, like it's been ad-free for ages, and now they're playing their own trailers of stuff in the middle of whatever you're watching. Like, adverts are everywhere. So influencers are the perfect antidote, because you can have a lovely time mindlessly consuming this, massive hit of dopamine, because let's be honest as well, objectively, you're looking at an aesthetically pretty thing. Like, that's where your house is so beautiful. In the case of female influencers, like if they're very naturally beautiful, or not naturally, whatever the case may be, like these people, good-looking people want to look at them. So that's obviously what they capitalize on as well. So at no point does the consumer feel like he or she is being directly advertised to, yet they, cease doom scrolling for 10 minutes and they're like, I really liked her trainers. And suddenly it's in there, and you can't kill that sort of idea or that image of what your life could be like if you just managed to sort of acquire, often in a very materialistic way, like whatever she was wearing or go to wherever she was going, whatever the case may be. I mean, it's interesting when you see them all coming together, like at Coachella or something like that. And that, I think, is actually a real condemnation for influencer culture, because you look at any footage of Coachella, just constant phones. Just phones everywhere. I don't know if you go to music festivals or concerts. Don't get me wrong, there are often phones and it's quite annoying, but it's just a sea, because everybody is there to just use Coachella as a sort of backdrop for brand me, So I remember looking at it and being like, wow, if anything shows you how kind of empty and boring and depressing life as an influencer must be, this is it.
Well, I had this dystopian experience. I was in Saudi Arabia working, doing some videography, and they have the world's largest mirrored building there. And on top of it, there's this swanky bar that no one has access to apart from when they do influencer shoots, where they have these grand banquets, like 50 of them, massive table, sunset, flames, waiters carrying all kinds of dishes. And I was tasked with filming it. And it was just this horrible, horrible evening where all of them had their phones out the whole time. If they didn't have their phones out, they were pouting for the cameras that were filming them. And none of them were having any interesting conversations. I walked past everyone. It wasn't because the conversations weren't interesting to me. It's because they just weren't having conversation, because they were either pouting or their face was down in their screen. And it's like, okay, maybe you want the lifestyle of an influencer, but what is that? It's not a life. it's marketing constantly. So you just want the shiny objects, but you don't want what's actually there. And I think part of this is selling happiness. A lot of influencers just sell happiness as the number one thing to pursue in the form of hedonism and short-term pleasures. But also those that do sell a kind of fulfillment through yoga retreats or male rights advocates saying for you to hustle harder, they're still selling fulfillment through happiness, through getting a Lamborghini, through getting more money, through getting more bitches. Like, it's all such a shallow metric of what will actually give us meaning and purpose in life.
You're right. I mean, happiness, unfortunately, if you want to pursue happiness, that's a noble pursuit in many ways. But if you kid yourself that happiness cannot at any point, be the enemy of your sort of contentment in the moment, it's ridiculous. Because obviously, I mean, happiness and fulfillment are arguably two different things. I think you can be happy with very little and you can be fulfilled with very little. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that, influencers sell this idea that happiness, can't come at the expense of your comfort, and that any kind of inconvenience just doesn't exist in their life. Like, can you imagine an influencer like missing a bus or something? Can you imagine an influencer like having a bad hair day? Like, this kind of stuff doesn't happen to them in the image they put forward. It obviously does, but they're very powerful in their ability to sort of take away what is actually a really key, in my view, integral part of the human experience, which is sometimes, being uncomfortable. I mean, I can very neatly loop back to the whole university idea now. You should be challenged, not only, obviously in university, it's by things you hear and hear said and read and that kind of thing, but in your life generally, it's important at times not to out and out sort of suffer, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but to suffer in the lesser sense of the word, like rejection or disappointment or loss of something that's important to you. Because obviously that keyword resilience is what you gain from that. And resilience, that's actually real currency to becoming maybe not happy, but really fulfilled. I also think, I've suffered, I'm very, very aware of having been, I was really lucky to grow up where and how I did. And I've recognised I've been extremely privileged in many, many ways in my life. But don't get me wrong, that obviously it's not all sunshine and roses. Like, things have gone wrong in my life, like grievously wrong at times. And at the time, it's obviously awful, but it's that age-old understanding that I think some people are losing their grip on, which is, it's not always true. It's not quite a what doesn't kill you idea, but it is that if you get through something, you're going to be more ready for the next thing in many ways. I mean, I don't know what you think about this, and it's a sort of generational point. Supposedly, us lot are becoming really awful at accepting rejection, for want of a better phrase, at kind of dealing with it. And, the whole kind of this idea that I can't remember exactly what it's called, but there's supposedly some disorder that basically means that you kind of can't handle rejection. Like, what kind of a job market is going to want people like that, What kind of a person would you have to sort of accept yourself becoming a person that is really not going to be as resilient, It's mad.
I think the problem is that we feel so entitled to have everything because we've been promised everything. Therefore, we expect everything. And another problem is how ubiquitous information is. So we kind of get this Dunning-Kruger effect where we think we know everything. Therefore, because we know everything, we're entitled.
How can we miss anything? How can we be wrong? Yeah.
And then downstream from that, I like to say that we like to do hard things as long as they're not hard. We like appealing to all of these virtuous traits, but we're not actually really experiencing them. I was speaking to Chris Williamson about this the other week, and he has this concept of 3D lessons. So you've got a 2D lesson, which might be reading a book, studying for something, watching a podcast, but that's not really actually a true lesson until you experience it in 3D. You can talk all day about how you like doing hard things and that you're such a hard worker, but you're going to a gym that's air conditioned, wearing oversized baggy clothes and doing the exact same workout that you've planned out specifically because you like it. That's not the same as dealing with a family member that's just died. And I think the key difference there is that truly difficult things, they're not self-imposed necessarily. They can be. I think that's it's adjacent to a truly difficult thing, but it's not quite the 3D experience of going through something that you didn't plan for. And now everything feels so calculated. It's part of this whole kind of argument that we're a left-brain society now, where we like to quantify everything.
Yeah.
And I see this as a huge issue, especially in something like dating, where it's very abstract, the idea of love, the idea of beauty, yet we want to quantify it. We want to put certain filters on dating apps that prevent the majority of the population from even being shown to us. And we expect to find the ideal partner through that.
Yeah. Can we come back to dating apps in one moment? Because I would like to talk about them. Just before, I think, although I agree with almost everything that you've just said, I would just push back on the fact that, yes, there's entitlement, but that somehow, I'm sort of I'm trying to reason it out in my mind at the moment, and it's something I think about often. Our generation, and it can be quite dangerous to characterize entire generations because that's like a vast amount of people.
For sure.
But let's sort of localize it to, let's say, young people within the West, or maybe just within the United Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Those who are kind of roughly like Gen Z at the moment. Sure, there's entitlement, but I think there's also a huge kind of this like juggernaut of cynicism and upset and depression that we're all lugging around, because sure, we might believe in the first instance, yeah, I deserve whatever I want, but at the same time, none of us think we'll get it. Like, be it something as simple as, look at the state of the housing market, look at, salaries compared to the cost of just even basic commodities. Like, there are many, many things that actually young people are really, really down about. And this leads us into relationships being one of them. I think, yeah, you're right, there's entitlement there. But I also think there's this kind of like down and out culture that exists among young people at the moment, that's massively perpetuated online. And it's sort of, people will make a joke. It's very tongue in cheek. It's almost quite British, a lot of it. And it's interesting to see the Americans using it. They're like, oh yeah, who cares? Have 10 beers because you're never going to get a house anyway. People are quite, that there's this kind of openness to just accepting what is in many ways quite a depressing future ahead of us, because I think, there is entitlement, but there's also an understanding of the world that we're going into isn't one that's necessarily welcoming everyone with open arms. Think about all the current political debates that are just piling up on top of each other. Nobody's even discussing them civilly, let alone coming to any kind of conclusion. Obviously, when it comes to sort of the current, geopolitically speaking, there are multiple ongoing wars. Those are discussed to the ends of the earth. Again, nothing much is sort of being concluded in a sort of meaningful way. Universities, you get a degree, how much is that worth now? Often precious little, yet you're in more debt than ever. Housing markets, I think that has a huge psychological impact on the young. The fact that, you can't understand if you work decently, any kind of job, that you can afford a home. The fact that that's like total pipe dream for so many people, I think that's the sign of a real failure in society. I know why it's happened, but that's kind of a whole other story. There are many, many things that young people are, they're sad about them. I think what bothers me, and maybe it's what bothers you, is that our generation is very readily sad. They're not that angry. And I'm kind of like, you can channel your frustration. We'll find some frustration and push back against things and challenge things. I know that sort of, in terms of like personality traits, not everybody is necessarily wired to sort of go and stand outside Parliament. But at the same time, that's not necessarily what you have to do. There are other ways to kind of enter into discourse about it with other young people and sort of do things like discuss money, discuss the difficulties that you think you might face in your life, discuss your frustrations. Here we get into relationships and dating apps and stuff, because it sometimes happens, but then because it's depressing to talk about and none of us have very much resilience, we're like, okay, let's not talk about it anymore.
My question to you would be, where does that cynicism come from? If you have no expectations of what you're entitled to or a perception of how the world ought to be, why would you be cynical?
No, I think you do have a perception. Because look, young people are constantly disparaging the boomers who nicked all the nice houses. Like, we know that it used to be the case. Sure, don't get me wrong, it was, there was a lot of other very complicated stuff going on politically. And the state of, like sex-based rights, that was pretty dire. Like, it was obviously, now is in many ways a great time to be alive in the West. But in other ways, we know that some things have been lost, like the right. It shouldn't have to be this sort of crazy, hyper ambitious dream. Oh, I work a job and I buy a house. Like, it sounds mad, but we know that is really quite ambitious, especially if you want to, heaven forbid, buy a house in a city in the United Kingdom. So don't even talk about London. Everybody's having to find these sort of awkward leg ups or go into huge amounts of debt or, rely on mummy and daddy if they have them, or, it's hard. It's especially hard because actually the fact that you can't buy a house in any way easily is, in my view, massively contributing to not the death, that's a bit extreme, but the decline in sort of commitment between people within relationships, and the fact that, you know, people aren't having children, quite frankly. If you don't have, like I say, the psychology of it really matters. You know, there's something sort of animal somewhere in there. If you don't have a roof over your head, if you don't have a home, like a nest, of course you're not going to be thinking, oh, let me bring another person into this situation. So yeah, of course we're not really that way oriented. The cynicism I'm talking about, yeah, that I think that's where it stems from. We know that used to be possible, in amongst other issues, and a more regressive society by comparison to many things about today. But of course we're going to be frustrated. There are things that I think you should be able to feel entitled to that are denied us, and the problem is we're in that kind of like weird, it's sort of a privileged situation where it's like it's not our fault, but at the same time we're going to have to be instrumental in fixing it. So I'm not sure how it's going to happen, but it needs to. But yeah, so on relationships, I've sort of like touched on it a couple of times now. Just to kind of lay some groundwork there. So according to Ofcom, 1 in 10 online adults, which is obviously the majority anyway, use dating apps in the UK. Now, I actually think that it's probably higher. That was I think from 2023. I think it's probably higher, but funnily enough, people are often quite hesitant to say that they use them. Personally, that's a taboo I hope never dies. Tinder is the most popular one, but there are obviously many others. In fact, Tinder kind of has this sort of reputation now that's becoming more and more evident as a sort of hookup app as opposed to a dating app, which is interesting. I think many apps they all kind of slide that way eventually.
That's interesting. Why do you think that to be true? Because
it's the simple fact that dating apps kill the culture that they're trying to give to people, don't they? They sort of shoot themselves in the foot. Tinder will still exist because hookup apps will also, you know, they'll still be popular because they are what they are. But, you know, it's not, I think, God, I'm not resolutely against dating apps by any means. And also they exist now, so there's no point me being like, oh, delete them all, it's not going to work. But I think there are it's just the issues with them are so obvious, and the way that they're used is so problematic. I also think another stat for you that's sort of fairly well known, but it's really surprising when you sort of think about it, is that 25 to 34-year-olds are the most common age group that use dating apps, followed by 18 to 24-year-olds. That's mad. That's a real shift from when it used to be sort of computer, you know, your PC, and you do online dating, and it's sort of older people, maybe those who lost a husband or a wife quite young, and it was sort of like an old fogey thing to do, to kind of go online and whatever it was. But now, young people, so people who are, you know, supposedly in the prime of their life and who have the time and the energy, even if not the money, to kind of go out and socialise and are desperate to do that, we're the main people who are online dating, and in doing so massively commodifying one of the most brilliant things about humans and human interaction. Like the irony, I don't know.
Well, it's funny how Hinge, I think, has the slogan "made to be deleted."
Yeah.
But then they need to make money somehow by keeping people on the platform. And again, this goes back to the whole thing of quantifying something that maybe shouldn't be quantified so fiercely, thinking that you know what you want best based on superficial standards that have no bearing on a long-term relationship. You're explicitly not selecting for what is going to be best when you're looking at someone's height. It's completely irrelevant to what's actually going to bring you a long-term relationship where you're going to be fulfilled and happy.
So I totally hear you, and I agree with you. On the height thing, it's interesting. It's what women... that's like a very commonly used filter for women. I'm trying to think that there's not really an equivalent one for men. It's interesting because height in men is obviously, you have no control over it. You can't kind of improve or improve it. You can't shrink or grow at your will. Of course, to an extent, like I mentioned, there's you know, we're mammals, and there's an idea of, you know, height equals strength and virility. It's obviously something we associate with masculinity in that more traditional, maybe biological sense, I suppose. Fine, I understand that. But the filtering of it is mad, because in the United Kingdom, as it stands, just over 14% of men are 6 foot or over. So, like, go figure. That's mad that you're instantly getting rid of over 80% of guys because of something like height. Now, I'll openly say, like, being with as a girl, like, I'm fairly tall actually. The average height for a woman in this country is 5'3". I'm just under 5'7", and I recognise why some women may not want to be with a guy that's shorter than them. I do get that, I think, but I've also had boyfriends that are visibly like very, very tall, and also a couple that are shorter than me. And like, it doesn't actually impact the quality of your relationship on a sort of emotional level necessarily. So the issue there kind of lies within women, but the problem is it impacts men and gives rise to some frustrations, among, I guess, sort of guys who are shorter of stature.
And I think the problem is asking the question, where are our priorities at the moment? Where do they lie? If you're selecting for height, your priority is clearly not in anything that has substance.
There's nothing about up here, is it? Like,
long term.
It's so obvious. Like, the fact, I mean, my issue with dating apps, there are so many problems, but the fact that filters an option, they're so clearly catering to a really like crap trait in humans.
Well, it makes sense for a hookup app, but not something that's going to make you find your future wife. And I don't know what the solution to this is, because there are so many other factors at play as well. Things like, where do our priorities lie? Women prioritizing careers and having more freedom, which is an amazing thing that you don't want to revert. It will be disgusting to say you need to stop studying, outperforming men, which therefore gives you higher standards. You see that women want a man who is highly educated. They did a study where they set up 2 profiles on Tinder, exactly the same. One man has a degree, one man doesn't. The man gets, I think it was 90% more swipes. Whereas they did the same for a woman, the woman gets 10% more swipes. It doesn't have that much of a bearing. So women are absolutely killing it. They're getting degrees much more than men are, and they want an educated man, but men aren't getting educated. They're also out earning men up to the age of 30 now, which is crazy. The wage gap does exist, but it's the other way. Then suddenly you have women who are hypergamous in nature. They want a man who has more status than them, so to speak, but they can't find any. And I was thinking about this the other day. There are so many different solutions and ways to kind of try and shift the culture. But I think something to piss off a lot of my fellow mates is that men need to be better too. That is one of the essentials that must happen. And there are all of these cynical people. There are these incel forums that are popping up, and that's overstated, the prevalence of people that categorize themselves as incels. But I think it's representative of what's going on more broadly with people who aren't incels, but that are very cynical and they're complaining about things rather than doing anything about it. And the key point is that they're not even trying, a lot of them.
Because God forbid it takes effort.
Exactly. We don't want to put in effort. We want to do hard things as long as they're not hard.
Yeah.
Literally. And you ask these people, there are surveys on this where people ask incels, okay, how many women have you approached? They're like, yeah, none.
Well, none, but yeah,
okay,
I know.
But I know that they don't like me. So we're kind of coming at this with this victim mentality. And I think that there is a strong argument to be made that partly one of the solutions to this, it's not bloody putting a woman back in the kitchen to make a sandwich and getting rid of all of her freedom. Like, well done. Women are crushing it. And maybe this has actually outlined that men have been coasting a little bit the last few decades, where in the past we have had a history.
They weren't coasting, they were just existing in women's absence. Women's, quite simply, it wasn't that women were necessarily better or worse there wasn't a very big period of time where women were also, in the boardroom and were way worse than men. It's the simple fact that women just weren't there at all for ages. So it wasn't really the question of whether men were coasting or not, because that implies that there was some competition in the first place. From women, there wasn't. So,
well, I think they could have been coasting relative to maybe how hard they need to work now, that women have actually had the freedom to prove themselves. And we're stood here going, oh shit, they can actually do this when they're not oppressed. And I hate this narrative of a patriarchy and that women are oppressed now. They're not, but historically they have been. Now that they're not and they have freedom,
not at all,
they're proving themselves. What are we going to do from here? Like, one of the only routes I see going forward is that men do need to level up as well.
Women are oppressed to the extent that they'll always, there's a difference between being oppressed and being sort of, women, you suffer in womanhood. Okay, look, it's something that's an interesting point. Julie Bindle's actually made this point really well. And by no means does any person, male or female, have to agree with me, but it's something I heard her say. I thought about it for ages, and I've been on the fence for a while. I think it's something I really do agree with, which is what actually unites all women. Like, biology, sure, but to be fair, biology can really vary within women. That is not to say that if you're male, you can be female. That's obviously absolute lies. But what I'm trying to say is, if you say, oh, okay, the ability to have children, well, some women are infertile, or you say, something about the aspect of appearance, obviously that doesn't fly. Like, there are many ways to kind of define womanhood sort of from a biological perspective, and that's fine. And that's fact, and that's true. And I'm very upset we lost our grip on that. I'm glad that we're sort of regaining it, hopefully. Anyway, the one thing that really does unite all women is the potential threat of men in many ways. Now, that's not to say that all men pose a threat to all women all the time. That's obviously not the case. If that was the case, I wouldn't leave the house. But at the end of the day, it's an interesting point. Again, I'm not entirely sure if I fully agree, but it's something that I can't quite pick a big hole in, because I recognise that women come from all, first of all, we're the majority. There are more women in the world than men, but that means that we're everywhere, and they lead vastly different lives and suffer in vastly different ways, and in other ways have huge privilege relative to other women, etc. But yeah, women, sorry, this is just me picking up on the fact that women aren't oppressed. They're not necessarily constantly oppressed directly, but they do have in common something that isn't true in the inverse. Not all men, men aren't posed a threat to from a sort of physical perspective, but by women in the same way. It's just not the case. So I'm not challenging you on the actual idea that women aren't oppressed. I agree, obviously, specifically within this society. I mean, you've been to Saudi Arabia, so obviously they are. But yeah, I agree with you that sort of out and out oppression is not rife everywhere. But it is important to recognise that. I don't want to say that it's a hierarchy. I don't believe that it is. But when it comes to biological superiority, the sort of rule of thumb, biologically speaking, is that obviously the average man is stronger, faster, more able to inflict damage on a woman than vice versa. That sort of goes without saying. And that matters. Obviously, we're in a civilized society, so that's not kind of the be-all and end-all, because we're not fighting each other for stuff all the time. But that does matter because of what that means for your brain. Like, sure, we're now in a society like I keep saying, is civilized and sort of cerebral and intellectual and advanced technologically and socially and in many other ways. But biology doesn't really necessarily care about that. Like, it doesn't catch up immediately just because we sort of think we know better now. In much the same way that, well, yeah, like there are so many elements of what it is to just be biologically human that don't match up with what we sort of ideally would want to happen. Like, at the end of the day, I'm 22. I'm literally, when I turned, 17, 18, I entered the prime time of my life to give birth safely. Should I have a child now? Absolutely not. Like, I mean, I could, and I don't, if a woman wanted to at this age, of course she could. But personally, in my stage of life, that would be a terrible idea. And yeah, from a sort of brain perspective, I don't think I'd be equipped to emotionally raise a child adequately right now. But biology doesn't necessarily care about that, So it's just interesting to remember that there are elements of womanhood, the biology sort of matters, and it does have an impact on the way that people comport themselves in society, no matter how civilized it might be. Sorry, that was just me picking up on the kind of are women oppressed or not idea.
No, I think it's interesting. I guess I would ask you, do you think that men are oppressed because women on average are emotionally more intelligent? Because they have a stronger trait, just like we are physically stronger. But I don't think it's a rabbit hole worth getting into.
No.
What's interesting is the unfair nature of nature, and the fact that women have to deal with a lot of physical stuff. Like, I agree with the fact, well, at least the sort of sentiment that they are all united by this thing. I think with men, I spoke to Dr. Warren Farrell about this, the fact that, and there's a risk of sounding very trad with this, but
That's right.
A woman's role is very much natural and a man's role is societal. That's just kind of how we've evolved to be. Men do the jobs in society that involve going out and working and providing, typically, and women, they are built to carry out natural traits like carrying a baby. And, I wish perhaps that we could live in some utopia where it was like 50-50. Men could give birth because they had the same traits, that we had perfect equality and perfect traits.
From a gamete perspective, it is, yeah. But
the way this impacts, that men could actually carry a baby, and we had identical builds. You can't do 50% of the breastfeeding, can you? Of course not. Exactly.
That's fine, yeah.
So there are certain implications that come with the way that we're wired. And, this goes hand in hand with the trans argument that people kind of don't want to accept that. the question is, what is going to happen going forward? And that's a very interesting one for me. Now that we have alleviated some of these societal restraints, what holes is it going to expose in the way that we have constructed our society? And we're running out of time. So it'll be interesting just to end on what you actually see as sort of the next decade for Gen Z going forwards, both anecdotally from mates and being at uni, because I think that is valuable for someone who's completely out of the loop, like me or someone older. What do you see as sort of the trajectory on a general level?
Okay, I'll open briefly just by saying that I think my answer to this would be different in an hour, let alone on a different day, let alone in a month's time. I'm obviously in quite a sort of transient period of my life. I've just finished an undergrad. I'm about to start a master's. Obviously that's not kind of crazy, but at the same time, I also, what that also means is that I'm still very much in the student bubble to an extent. Obviously, operating as a postgrad is different, but it's the same idea. Also, the nature, like the university that I'll be at is very much that. So it's like, that's fine. So I'm not going to try and comment as somebody that's super, more worldly than the next person. But what I say is, Gen Z specifically, I think that there are real issues emotionally that I think are being so overdiagnosed, and everything's suddenly a syndrome or a disorder or whatever. But at no point are those things actually being addressed, at source. I mean, everybody's happy to sort of medicate or meditate or whatever the case might be, or consume content and kind of, on the day-to-day kind of get by. But at source, it is true that there are reasons why Gen Z are in many ways disillusioned. I mean, we know that we're the generation, we're sort of drinking less, going out less, having less sex. Like, we're very, very, very risk averse. That's a really important one to mention. And I recognise why, in some ways, that's actually quite a logical way to be for some people. I get that. Regarding the stuff we've discussed about sort of our collective future. But it's frustrating that a lot of people feel that they have no choice but to take this lying down. Now, I say that because I'm not trying to say why they're taking it lying down. I'm saying I know that many people literally don't see another path. And that's because it's hard to sort of forge one. I mean, obviously, if you're sort of lost in the fray of online culture and you're commodifying human interaction by just swiping, and you're sort of frustrated by university because you're either bored or disengaged or both, or you feel like it's a waste of time, whatever's going on. If you're in a job that isn't fulfilling, if your friendships are sort of stagnating, if you're sort of lonely in a world that's more connected than ever, of course you're going to feel low, and that down and out culture that I've referenced, of course it's going to exist, and of course you're going to struggle to find a way out. That's not me saying there's a massive mental health crisis, we should all be devastated. I think there's a kind of en masse upset. I don't think everybody's mentally unwell. I think we're responding to a situation that we're seeing, and that's also being quite sort of pushed on us, especially by those older than us, generations above us, especially the millennials. Not to sort of point the finger, but whatever. Who was sort of saying, yep, it's awful, you're all screwed. Now, the way out, obviously everybody will have their, if you've got any idea at all, I guarantee most people's would be different. But I think definitely in schools and universities, there can be real tangible change, and there can be, basically, we need to sort of begin rebuilding up young people's resilience and ability to hear no and potentially push back against it. Be that, no, you don't get this job, or no, I don't agree with you. I think something should also become, maybe like more difficult. Like, I think getting into university, it should be accessible in that it should not be the case that, only privately educated people can get in. There's obviously still a disparity there, and I think that is wrong. That's frustrating. Bristol actually is a really good example of that. I was partially privately educated, partially not. So, I'm obviously not, I'm not sort of unbiased, but I'm also not super like biased in either direction. I was also educated outside of the UK for a bit, so there's a part of me that kind of like, I've been in both courts, and I've benefited from obviously being privately educated loads, so I'm not going to sort of pretend like I'm some martyr. But look, definitely schools and universities, there needs to be massive change. Like in schools, again, I mean, as you said, I risk sounding sort of trad, but some discipline has really, really gone out the window. And you've got people like Catherine Burblesing, or I've forgotten his first name, but his surname's Ebenezer, and he was kind of branded like headmaster from hell. Like, these are head teachers who are sort of being dubbed like crazy and aggressive and harsh and like backwards and archaic because they're sort of making children wear their uniform all the time, or making children, you know, stand up when a teacher comes into the room. Like, don't get me wrong, there are elements of the former practices within schooling in this country that are wrong. Like, I don't think you should ever hit a child, for example. That's ridiculous. But there are other things that have sort of fallen by the wayside, and I'm not quite sure why. And I think that they matter. And there are other, you know, there are places in the world, in the West, that still champion certain things that we kind of dub as archaic within education, especially just within school, let alone university, that I think are good things. And we've kind of binned off because we've decided that it's kind of not soft and welcoming and progressive. Why? Children really rise to responsibility when given it. And if they don't, then they really can be helped to do so. Obviously, you've got so many issues regarding the funding of schooling. Teaching isn't an especially attractive profession for many, many reasons. But a lot can start in schools, and then by extension within universities. We kind of touched on whether fewer people need to go. As I mentioned, I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, maybe there's something to be said there. I think the admissions process should probably look quite different. I think interviews should be far more common than they are. A big part of why they're not is because supposedly they're very anxiety inducing. Like, we're failing young people before they've begun, and then they think that they're failures. And it doesn't matter where your strength, where you sort of sit on the strength of mind spectrum. If you're told something a lot, and if you're sort of made to imbibe it online from your peers, from your potentially in your family, from those who, you know, authorities over you in an education environment, you can't really be blamed for taking in a bit of it. Like, you've got to be quite odd in many. I mean, you and I have done very unorthodox things in many ways within social circles, and you know, within your sort of life thus far. That's anomalous. In many ways, you benefit from the fact it's anomalous precisely because there's not other people doing it.
For sure.
But that doesn't mean there shouldn't be, you know?
We don't want the anomalies to be succeeding even more so because the majority are failing.
And competition's good. Like, I think it'd be great if there was more competition. Healthy competition is brilliant. I think it matters. Not everybody has to be competitive. And honestly, I do think there's sort of nature-nurture elements that mean that not everybody really can be in the same way as other people, and you shouldn't sort of suffer that. But yeah, I think with education is key. There's clearly a lot going wrong. You know, there was just sort of anecdotally, there was a school recently, I can't actually remember where, but the children in year 6 doing their SATs, their SATs exams, they had to find like 54 different rooms because so many children weren't able to sit in a room full of other children taking exams. Like, it's not really the kids' fault if you pander to them. The whole idea, I mean, you know, a child should push boundaries and you hold them firm, you know. Obviously parenting, I'm not a parent as yet, but
that's
there
what
are issues
children
there as
do.
well. Exactly.
I was in a buggy until like age 4
because you just wanted to be.
Because my mum let me and I wanted to be. If she pushed back, then I would have probably walked straight away.
Well, there you go. I'm one of 3, and my youngest, I'm in the middle, and my youngest sibling is a brother, and so he's the youngest and a boy, and that obviously, boys and girls do age very, very differently, especially in the early stages. And so yeah, he kind of got away with absolutely loads for ages, but then there was a time where, you know, credit to them, my parents were like, nope, you're not doing certain things anymore. The problem is that obviously that requires quite a lot of energy. You've got to be able to sort of have the argument with a toddler, basically, and that's frustrating. Also, it can be hard to deny your child something if you love them and you think the sun shines out their arse. It's difficult to be like, nope, you're going to walk. Anyway, yeah, so parenting is obviously a thing. I won't speak about that with personal authority because obviously I'm not one. Education is definitely the one where I can speak, having just been in it and deciding to stay in it. University specifically, to loop all the way back to the start, students must be challenged. They must. I mean, I know that I don't know what's best for myself a lot of the time, but the one thing that I think where that's really true is often, people don't want to do hard things. Like, you owe it to a student who's, you know, turning up, even if they're hungover, and who's put money on the line and who was engaged enough to apply and turn up and do well in their exams in the first place. Challenge them. Don't hurt them. Don't embarrass them, because they'll simply stop turning up. But challenge stuff, make it exciting, make it engaging. Yes, sure, this lies on academics, but it also lies on the universities themselves to not perpetuate a culture of sort of censorship and this kind of like very, very boring, homogenous sets of opinions that you have to hold and boxes you have to tick and lanyards you have to wear. A university should, you know, a poster for the pro-life society at the University of Bristol shouldn't have to be, as it was while I was there, kind of very, very vaguely dotted around, monochromatic, this big, that had no information about the date or time because they were scared people would turn up and, you know, cause problems. That should be allowed to be there next to a poster about, like, come to the Intersectional Feminist Society. Promote everything. Let students have a bit of free reign, because, like I say, they will rise to challenges. I don't think that's naively optimistic. I think, I'm not trying to sort of be kind and bat for our side. I think that's fair enough.
I think kids and teenagers and young people, they'll always rise or fall to your expectations. That's the way it is. Maeve Halligan, thank you so much for coming on The Next Generation. Where can people find more of your work?
Thank you very much for having me. I am on the usual socials under my name. And yeah, I've been doing some writing, etc. So there should be more of that over the course of this summer and into the next academic year. Cool.